Might have been some miscommunication. She told me roast, so I'm a little concerned. I may have to throw out the script. Real quick, I'd like to greet our friends on Zoom, Eliana, Alba, Jeff, Kathy, Yancey, Eric, and Mindy. Great to see your faces on there. Everyone's cheering.
We've all been waving at you this whole time.
We can't see you, but we see you. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm not going to introduce myself, but I will say that I've held a couple of roles since I've been at DU, as a teaching line professor in the writing program, as a former graduate student in the English department here at DU. All of that is actually relevant, I promise. It's my great pleasure today to introduce Doug Hesse. If I had to give a title to this introduction, I would name the central challenge I had in composing it: where to start. Doug's accomplishments are myriad. His contributions to the university, to the field, and to the profession are extensive. I had thought to list some of them from his CV, but the printed version is only available in an unwieldy 3-bound volumes, and the digital copy is on an external hard drive somewhere in his office or basement. A colleague told me to tell that joke. At the reception, I'll tell you who it was. So, according to Doug's Wikipedia page, Doug completed his degrees at the University of Iowa. He's held several academic appointments, most notably at Illinois State University and the University of Denver. Doug has served as a leader of several national organizations, president of the Council of Writing Program Administrators, chair of 4Cs, president of the National Council of Teachers of English, and most recently, chair of the Association for Writing Across the Curriculum. See, I didn't even use the acronyms. Doug has published multiple books and over 80 essays, articles, and chapters in all the major journals in the field of writing studies and beyond. He was also, notably, inducted into the DeWitt Central High School Hall of Fame in 2016. But those accomplishments don't speak to the many stories, insights, and experiences he's able to share about his many years in the profession, or the depth of connections and friendships he's established across the field, across the country, and across the decades of his career. So at the risk of being self-indulgent, I know too late, I want to focus for a moment on personal interactions, starting with the story, and moving to what I value about Doug as a colleague, and finishing with what I think is a key part of his legacy at DU. So I met Doug Hesse in the summer of 2009. Freshly arrived in Denver to begin my PhD in the Rhetoric and Theory track in the English department, I came to campus one day to meet with then director of the Writing Center, Eliana Schoenberg, to discuss getting started, getting to know my way around, and so on. As I was chatting with Eliana about starting graduate school, trying to get into the field of writing studies, and so on, Doug emerged from his office, curious about the conversation. He sat with us in that small writing program office in the old Penrose Library for about 45 minutes, talking about the field, the university, and even South Denver. I left with a warm feeling of welcome and a list of books in the field that I had asked for and admittedly never read. I will now tell you what I have never told anyone else ever. I did not understand the magnitude of what had happened because I did not know how big of a deal Doug was and is in our field. I didn't know the field well, for one, but you would never know from Doug's demeanor on that day what he brought to that little break room table. I tell the story not just because it's an amusing self-own, but to underscore one of the things I valued about working with Doug as a student. You always had his full attention. To be fair, it wasn't always easy to find a way onto his schedule, but when you did, he was fully present. Even today, in his last quarter at DU, Doug will tell you of the energizing conversations he's having with his undergraduates and the focus he has on their learning. Being there, being present may not sound like much, but this is not faint praise. I think most of us know how vital that presence and attention can be for students of writing at any level. And for Doug, it's not just in that moment, as I'll explain shortly. As a member of the faculty in the writing program, I've turned to archives as a key location of the teaching of writing and research. And I will gladly credit Doug's interest in the history of writing as one influence. While I may chuckle a bit at Doug's emails, uncovering the programs and documents from writing retreats past, you remember, I think Doug's attention to the records in his possession denotes a commitment to the field's past and its future. Admittedly, I did have to rush over to his office the other day to beg him not to throw out a blueprint for the original writing program office in Penrose. But when I did, he showed me notebooks and handwritten reflections from a graduate class he taught at Illinois State years ago, and pointed to each student name with a comment on where they'd come. There were several writing program directors, and almost all were accomplished professionals in the field. So when I say Doug is present for his students, he remembers them too, and where they go, and what they become. And that leads me to what I think is a key part of Doug's legacy here at DU. As the founding executive director of the writing program, Doug helped lay the groundwork for a vibrant and accomplished program. He would also, no doubt, immediately observe that this was a collaboration. The original faculty helped to establish what the program was and would become, and faculty that have arrived since have contributed to the community we now know. The program is, well, a lot. There are nearly 30 of us, a writing center, a minor, and numerous commitments on and off campus. We're not perfect. We strive to improve. But as our former colleague Keith Rhodes was fond of pointing out, the community we have here is special. And Keith had seen some things in his career. The point I want to make here is in context. I don't pretend that the University of Denver is not facing challenges today. But I believe the University of Denver is a better place because of Doug Hesse's contributions. I believe that the DU community is stronger because of the University Writing Program. In creating that robust culture of writing on campus, we are able to meet our students where they are. We are able to meet our colleagues from across campus where they are. And we are able to save a space for writing when the university and the world need it most. As Doug might put it, I sound a bit of a Pollyanna here, but I believe in this program and in my colleagues, and I believe a big part of Doug Hesse's legacy here is in the program he helped create. It's a program that grows and changes, it strives and struggles, but it can and will meet the challenges we face in the university, in the profession, and in the world today. But that's enough of what probably sounds like hyperbole. It's been my great pleasure to say a few words about Doug, and I look forward to his remarks today. Please join me in welcoming Doug Hesse.
I'm overwhelmed. Thank you. And then you have to go surprise me with Amy and Lauren. And then surprise me further online with Eliana, all the known characters. So I really appreciate this. I want to I'll thank Amanda for arrangements as always. I really want to thank Sheila. It's been such a delight watching her expertise really make things better here continually. So when I talk to colleagues around the country, and they'll say, "Didn't Sheila Carter-Todd come to DU?" And I said, "Yes." And they said, "Aren't you lucky?" And I said, "Yes, I am." So, and also Jennifer Karras, who has now I'll choke up again, but the number of hours in her office or her in my office, or us having coffee, or us talking about daughters swimming or doing things that daughters do that are sometimes maddening, they're just legion. So thank you. So I have, I thought, a few weeks ago when I said, well, can I come to a writing program faculty meeting, especially if you're doing some kind of like professional development, because I'd like to just hear people who are in my part of the university really talking shop with each other. And of course, yes, certainly. And then it was like, well, would you like to speak at, well, sure, I mean, I'm not shy about speaking. But then this week I detected, like, oh wait, this might be a bigger deal. So anyway, what I did was put together some slides, and I hope I can talk coherently about them. This first slide, I should just say, the very first writing class that I took at the University of Iowa was with Karl Klaus. And the very first assignment I did, he gave us a sentence. Writers know that revision in its root sense means to see again. And he had us revise it in 4 different ways. Addition, subtraction, transposition, substitution. And somewhere, I mean, Rob is spot on, I'm a pack rat. Somewhere I have that first paper with Karl. But after 2 hours of rummaging in my basement last night, I felt life is too short. But anyway, for reasons that you'll maybe detect, this particular memory resonated. And frankly, it was the reason, that was the moment when I understood with that assignment that writing was profoundly complicated and interesting. I mean, I'd been the guy who wrote poems because he had a girlfriend in high school who liked poems. He was not a good poet. So I liked writing, but I didn't understand it was intellectually interesting. So let's go back to 2005, the MLA meeting in Washington, D.C., where Ann Dobbins, Luc Baudouin, and I interviewed 35 people. Here were the survivors. And I will say I do remember these people walking into the room. But I wanted to just muse a little bit about somebody whose name is up here, but it's crossed out. A woman walks into the room, and I look at her, and I recognize, I mean, I had seen her last name, which I'm not going to say. And, oh, isn't that interesting? And she says, "You don't recognize me, do you?" And I said, "I'm sorry." I said, "Your name is familiar." She said, "I used to be Amy, and now I'm Wilson." We might have to edit this. She was the daughter of my master's thesis director. And I knew Amy when she was 5, and I would ride my bike over to her house, and her father's house, actually, if she lived there. And she would recognize I had an orange 10-speed Centurion bicycle, that when the bike was propped against the front tree, that I was there, and she liked it. So that was really nostalgic. And so we interviewed Amy. She had an MFA in nonfiction from Iowa, which was a degree that I had 25 years earlier. She didn't know composition studies at all. I was absolutely rooting for her, and there was no way that she would have qualified against, you saw that list of folks there. So, you know, that was the end. And I tried to make a case for Amy and / Wilson to Ann and the Luke, and they said, you know, "Doug, no, this program is really centered around rhetoric and so on." That moment tore me because it was about midway through my career, 19 years after I had gotten my PhD, 18 years from now. And I thought, did you expect that you would be saying no to somebody like this for a job that you... So my degrees, my training, such as it was in writing and not in composition, and in aesthetics and ballet, and not in argument. And yet, from almost the very outset, I was a poser in this particular field. My master's thesis was, I did find a copy of it. It's a wild combination of personal essays and Wittgenstein. And it's all written in short chunks, and in A Walk Among Stars is its title, and the stars were the little asterisks that were between the sections of the piece. But anyway, in 1980, I finished that degree, and I could tell you, Rob, a long story about not knowing who was interviewing me. We'll save it. But I went to Findlay College, Findlay, Ohio. We joked that that the English faculty could have faculty meetings in the racquetball court. There were 4 of us. I was there on a 1-year position, non-tenure track the whole time I was there, teaching 4-4 load at $10,500 in 1980. So I always taught a 5th class every semester. 2 things about this. One was, so you heard my background, which was sort of belletristic and so on, and so I organized writing courses the way I thought they should be taught. And at one point in the semester, faculty exchanged papers with each other so that students could get comments from somebody else. And so Bob Ewald got my set of papers, and they came back just covered with comments like, where are your topic sentences? Where are... And it was at that point I thought, man, I'm not fitting in here. And I felt really bad for my students. It's like I somehow failed them by not understanding what this course is about, what those expectations were. But, you know, so I sort of got along with the program. It was fine. At one point, the president of there were 800 FTE students at that time at Findlay. Findlay has now grown to 4,000 students. You might be curious to know this, Richard and Rebecca. But the president of the university, a guy named Glenn Rasmussen, sort of thought I could do things. So at that point, for example, the student paper and the student yearbook were in just desperately, would you advise those? Sure. So that meant Tuesday nights I would show up. The paper came out once a week. And until 1 and 2 in the morning, somewhere along those times, I would just get like exasperated with the hands-off. It's like, what do you need written? Just let me do it. So here's my appointment letter. By the time I left, I was making $13,000. So I think you have a fine future in higher education. That's very nice. I'll move along a little bit more quickly. My first couple of publications were these. So one was this, you can see from the typescript, these were not like high-end. This was not, but there was presciently here an article. I was teaching a poetry class, and so I would write bad poems so that students would actually like comment. And of course, sometimes they think the bad poems are great, and then it's like, oh shit, what are we doing now? But there it was, poetry teacher, and then the other was a review of one of the very early and groundbreaking books in writing across the curriculum. And I remember the first draft of this review, which was done for Rick Gebhardt. I think I was kind of mean. I wish I had a draft. And Rick said, you know, Doug, some people don't know the things that you know. And I took that both ways, as you think. So I revised it, and there it is. No, anyway, in 1983, then my then wife Dawn said, "Well, I'm leaving Findlay. You can come with me, or you can stay." So I went back to the PhD program, wrote a dissertation that's really probably best described right now as structuralist theory applied to narrative essays. And I published a lot of stuff out of this. I never tried to publish the thing. But I dug this up this week and found like the epigraph in it was from composer Arnold Schoenberg. So there's there's like these musical metaphors in that going on throughout this. Along the way, by that time we had a couple of kids, and we was bound and determined not to take out student loans. I did a stint as a writer this was on top of being a TA, as a writer for the hospital administration program. Ghost wrote this article, which Sam Levy did credit me with, on bottom line healthcare. Was railing against for-profit medicine. And I remember getting a phone call from NPR. They wanted to interview me. It's like, no, you want to introduce Sam. But also at that time, I was smart enough to realize that there was something, as a graduate student, more rewarding and frankly easier at working in the writing center than teaching multiple classes. So I spent a lot of my time teaching in the writing center, and Lou Kelly was Lou would have been right at home walking out of Anderson and seeing the encampment there. Lou would be somebody, you'd walk by the steps of Old Capitol and she'd have a bullhorn yelling at something. So I came to Illinois State University, and after my first year, they said, well, will you direct this fledgling WAC program? Oh, okay. After the second year, they said, oh, would you direct the first year writing program? At that time, 4,000 students a year, 40 new TAs every year, combination of master's and PhD. But as I've said too many times, our car needed replacement, and an 11-month salary sounded better than 9 months. But just as a characterization of the days, we were teaching word processing. Illinois State at that time was the first major university to teach every meeting of every section of writing classes in a computer classroom. The classroom, nobody could afford a computer at that time. One of my early doctoral students, Scott DeWitt, who went on to direct the writing program at Ohio State, Scott, I remember in 1990, bought a Mac SE for $2,100. He was making $8,000 a year as a TA. So they function as lab. WordStar, there's a blast from here's me, 1987. And I remember Trish, I remember this reporter coming to class, and it just didn't look like teaching. She couldn't figure out what was going on. Like, you just said something, and then everybody started, and then you went around and talked to everybody, and everybody talked to each other, and these were very productive times. But we were using at that point the Daedalus software system. This was when did you start teaching?
It was 97 maybe.
Okay, you would have been, yeah. So you've been in the aftermath of this. So we were using Daedalus, which was, we didn't have the internet, it was an intranet thing. And you'll remember that Lester Fagley famously in Fragments of Rationality said, well, this is going to save us. Well, this is what happened. So we had set up in 2 classes. They were in adjacent but separate rooms. This class is going to make arguments for this position, and that class is going to make arguments for that position, and spontaneously they devolve into this flaming, which is really something. So, you know, mind you, the Mosaic browser and Netscape were they were out in beta, but it's not like they were emulating anything. So, and I still have. You know, I'm not going to burst these things. So, I think about this. A couple weeks ago, I was asked, and ultimately couldn't attend, but sent a video to speak at a symposium for Ann Geer, who was retiring, and they spoke about this particular book, which was published in 1993, Into the Field, Sites of Composition Studies. And what I was struck by in thinking about this flame war that happens in relation to this was people like Jim Berlin, John Trimber, a lot of folks in the height of the theory wars were like, we need to do something about social discourse, something about the social mission of the university. We need to improve things. You know, a lot of it was coming out of Marxist economics, but not all of it. And we're on the cusp of getting the teaching of writing right. We just orient it toward civic discourse, argument, rational things, and so on. And of course, here we are, you know, in 2024. And there's part of me that says, man, in 31 years, composition studies has failed. Schools have failed. Mind you, they've had a lot of assistance by bad politicians in failure. I think of the prevalence of, you know, bad reading, bad faith writing. And it seems to me that in terms of certainly the salvation that Aristotelian rhetoric was going to provide, it didn't. Guess what? You know, maybe we'd done better to pay attention to Kenneth Burke. Many of you know this particular essay. But even then, I'm not sure it's a matter of we just need to get our pedagogy straight. But I think we were naive, a lot of us in the 80s and 90s, that once we get rid of that damn 5-paragraph theme and this outmoded formalism and the modes of discourse and all of that garbage, and really focused on writing, that, you know, the Enlightenment would happen. And so there was ISU. I could regale you with more of that. But here's DU. Not only do I have boxes of paper, I have gigabytes of... This is the announcement of Charles Lamb, the old listserv, September 9th, 2006. Some of you will see your names and your old email addresses on this. BGNet shows up. One of the things I want to note about this particular moment was, I wanted to fit this all on one slide, but this is, the bottom of this was an email from David Daniels inviting us all to come and play kickball and drink beer. Probably at Wash Park, I don't know where, but anyway, you know, we were all thrown together, or I had thrown some of you together, at a particular time, and you know, these were, to my mind, heady days. Let's invent a curriculum, let's figure this out. And we gained some notoriety, just deservedly. I mean, the university, to its credit, and this credit belongs to people who were here, not me, decided to invest in a fully professionally staffed, as best we could at that time, writing program. And I spent a lot of time in those days talking to reporters. I remember at one point the provost from Albany calls me and says, I want to come and visit your writing program. So I made 2 phone calls. I called Bob Yagelski, who was at Albany, and said, Bob, do you know your provost wants to come here? He goes, no. So Bob invited himself on the trip, and then I called Greg Kivistad and said, hey, would you meet with this guy? And then, so they emulated, and Wake Forest, many other places around the country have, emulated this model, about which I have some ideas, comments at this point, but not for today. But anyway, and I was really glad, Rob, that you pointed out that this was truly a collaborative kind of enterprise. And, we weren't sufficiently burnt out at that point that we would say no to things. I could regale you with lots of stuff, projects. Here's one that I came out. I read through this. I thought, it's still relatively smart. It's 20 pages. Done. Although if you're still there, there's your name. But I also came across a bunch of other stuff. So this, I was doing a tutorial with a grad student, and I pulled the rhetorical tradition, Bazell and Hertzberg, off the shelf, and I open it, and this paper falls out, and it's an introduction for Pat Bazell. So here's a question. Did she come here? I mean, honestly, was this an introduction to Illinois State, or where, okay, no. At one point, Joe Ponce, I had him put together a timeline of the writing program. I don't know if that still survived anything, but it was like, we need to put things down, what happened. So, but then I also have a ton of this kind of stuff. Carol Sampson retiring. Here were my comments, my notes to myself. So I saw, some of you probably have, I saw Carol about 3 months ago at a concert at that year downtown. So I could keep ruminating, but let me try to figure out what might be wisdom is folly. Some thoughts, some musings going forward. So in February last year, I was flying to the Writing Research Across Borders conference in Norway, and I sat next to the guy who was the CEO of this particular not-for-profit, Causal Design. And basically what they do is empirical research for NGOs. Are you doing any good or not? He asked me what I did. I tell him, an English professor, and he said, well, what do you think of ChatGPT? So I shared some ideas. I said, what do you think? And he said, I think it's great. He said, he is from Denver. Their offices are in Denver and Bangkok. And he said, look, we have to do a lot of, a pro forma part of any report we do is like an environmental survey. What's going on in this country, whether it's politics, whether it's economics. He says, we just have AI do that first draft and then we'll fit. He goes, it's better than what the people we're hiring from Corbell are able to write, and he said, and it doesn't have the egos that they have. So, here's a certain, an interesting moment. But it's the world in which it's not only what might happen in corporate America, but when pseudo-write, which is the best name you could ever invent for this corporation, you can Google it, promises to write a novel from start to finish in a week. And the nice thing about it is it's in your style. So what gets me thinking about this is I can understand the drive to have artificial intelligence churn out lots of prose that in the old-fashioned days would have been called boilerplate. But your novel is one thing, or as I was saying, people writing wedding vows. And just think about that for a minute. You could actually use the Book of Common Prayer and join a centuries-old tradition. Or you could write your own, but the idea... So it's clearly that for an interesting swath of the population, writing is less important than having written, or rather, than having writing attributed to you. And this is a profound cultural moment. And I think that if we as a field don't really figure out some things about how style and voice, how lived experience matter or don't matter in the act of writing, and for what kinds of texts, we'll miss something profound. I suppose when my Aunt Diane passed this week, I could have told Gen AI to write something about her. It would not have remembered eating frozen strawberry jam in a farm outside Kalmus, Iowa in 1963. And I think these spaces where this kind of writing matters is something we really ought to be thinking about. I'll go faster here. So I think that Gen AI compels us to, and we ought in reciprocation, write back. Why is it again that we write? Why do we read? If I will say, Sheila may disagree, but I would happily have had Gen AI write annual reviews. I would have, Jennifer too, I'd have no problem. But there are other kinds of writing that I would not as happily get out of the way. And I think we ought to make our students understand that kind of writing. There is a vital, to me at least, messy humanity of writing. And that writing, I will not say it's the most important or anything grand like that, but it is an aspect of being. We have to think about this. I know people are, but right now we're still in the phase of a lot of instrumental thinking, which is important and needs to happen, but also there's a space cleared out, I think, to imagine other questions about writing. Here's another musing. It's really struck me how writing studies has been a leader in restructuring how we understand teaching. I mean, writing classrooms were flipped 50 years ago or 70 years ago. And so when, when you come to me 15 or 20 years ago and say, you need to have a student-centered classroom, I say, please. Yeah. It's like Columbus coming. You all need to have a civilization to the good folks in Massachusetts. So, but I think there are ways that writing still can and should be driving. Look, I can be really petty and territorial. It's like we ought to sponsor the events about writing and really, because WAC did that for 20 years and became the leading edge of faculty development for teaching. But okay, it's moved on in other ways. But I think there are still some things that writing could do. I think a lot about how cultural studies, to my mind, has really been, emergent in the teaching of writing. Back in '93, Trimber and Berlin in that book were imagining cultural studies. So the idea of theme-driven courses as opposed to technique-driven courses, or whatever. Again, I have opinions, but I'll just say that that's there right now. There's a potential cost to that and a potential opportunity. Several of us in the 90s, when first-year seminars were coming around, and they were often replacing writing courses at schools, were nervous about that. Not partly it was turf, but partly it was they won't get the things about writing. The courses will be about that rather than about them. But we weathered that. And obviously there's really smart things that can be done with a thematic vehicle. But there is a question about, could WAC really achieve, could WID really achieve its potential and make first year writing superfluous? The consolation is they never will, but it's worth thinking. And so the extent to which a writing course looks like a writing course, does not look like another course in the university, is both politically, I think, important, but also just ethically important for putting the focus on teaching writing. Now, it is striking to me, watching FSEM, ASEM, organizing things along thematic or problems or topics or concepts. So I think there's an interesting way that composition can still lead, like, might majors or general education be reconfigured differently, less along disciplinary things, maybe even less along, you can plug your ears, modes of inquiry, but more along, problems and with all of the attendant things coming in. And I think this is something that we know about. As I'm on the fumes on my way out of here, have really been struck by, I'll just be blunt, composition's bureaucratic turn. The kind of analysis of itself, or even its participation in debates that are incredibly important but are not necessarily part of our disciplinary core. We should be involved with them, but we actually have a central set of research and pedagogical issues that justify our existence as a discipline. In the interest of time, I'm going to skip out, but Kathy, I was going to talk about you on this slide. But I will say really briefly, Kathy traced the history of some episodes in writing studies since the 50s, from a linguistics focus to a process focus that brought into it cognitive emphases, to the high theory of the early 90s, to a renewal of teaching but informed by those other things. And now, the big issues are a big source of conversation is disciplinary status, working conditions, and so on. We must pay attention to those, but we can't exclusively pay attention to those and lose some of the pedagogical rhetoric. I'm going to skip over things. I'm going to move to an end here. So as Rob pointed out, my main interest the past 3 years has been undergraduate teaching. And I was on a dissertation defense yesterday afternoon. It was fun, but it's not where I've been living. And I've really been interested in writing and writers. So, long story short, I became advisor of Foothills Literary Magazine. My advisee wanted to start again. I said, here's how you would do it. Will you be an advisor? Sure. So this was yesterday, Wednesday, the release party for the new, and I was thinking, who is the Wilson Deal in this photograph? Would I hire her? I'd like to think I would. But I think the times have changed so that there's a moment for the reemergence of the literary, the personal, the belletristic, the kind of writing that fills spaces that AI cannot fill, or if it could, should not fill for people who can use writing as part of establishing who they are, how they fit into things. Look at all these pretty slides. I will send, I'll make sure that you have access to these slides. And with a beer, you can tell me, to tell you about the other things. But a couple of things. So, at this point, what's Doug doing after retirement? Well, Doug's going to write. And we're going to be in Denver for at least a while until we get decrepit and throw ourselves in the mercy of our it's going to be our daughters. I'm looking at many daughters in the room. So the one project is this is one of my favorite things that I published in the past several years, writing as a liberal art in an age neither artful nor liberal, which is trying to make the case of the blathering that I just did for conceiving of kinds of writing and what should happen in writing courses, not in service of the disciplines, perhaps in service certainly to civic discourse, but also in service to selves and relationships, and making an argument that will in fact serve civic discourse. So I don't intend, and the world does not need another Peter Elbow, but it's in the Elbow Bartholomew, Peter is talking to me a little bit more these days. Another project I want to do is I've got the title. I just need to write. But people say, well, you've done all this thing over the years. You should write a history. And I thought, oh, I should. So I don't want to. But what I could do is to write a number of personal essays grounded in narrative that evoke particular times and places. So, there might be an essay that begins with Julie Vasilovich in my first semester of teaching at Findlay College. Julie was also, a couple years later, Monica's first babysitter. Could be an essay about meeting Kenneth Burke, 1989 in Seattle. He was not well, sitting in the corner of a reception room by himself. Hello, Mr. Burke. Playing pool with Jim Berlin. Eric Martin was the assistant, he was a graduate assistant WPA at Illinois State when I was going through divorce, and Eric stands up. I've got this. There are people in this room who have done that for each other. Keep doing it. Helen Gerenbeck was my kid's first grade teacher. I had a writing symposium where I invited all of these authorities from around the country, and I invited Helen to come and speak to the faculty about teaching writing to first graders. It's profoundly good. I was across the hallway for a couple of years from David Foster Wallace. We would debate back and forth. A couple of times we co-taught together. We watched a lot of X-Files together. He took a lot of money playing poker from me. There's something there. There was a student, Ken, that's not his name, who's a first-year TA, came in after his first week of teaching, said, I need to quit, I can't do this. I said, well, maybe you can do it another week, and I'll help you. And another week after that. Ken is a dean now. Kathy Yancey, I tell too many stories of times with Kathy Yancey. I can't do them justice because there are so many, but I will say that I'm lucky that she has a daughter who lives in Denver, and so when Kathy comes to Denver, we get together. And again, I think those are the best things of a career, is that if you have friends as well as colleagues or competitors. Eating fried chicken at a picnic bench with Wendy Bishop in Oxford, Mississippi in the mid-90s. Sitting for a lunch, a dinner that I put together in San Antonio with Gunter Kress, Bob Scholes, Gail Haywisher, and just watching Kress and Scholes go at it about multimodal literacy in the best way. I mean, you just stood back and felt lucky. Amy Coe. I remember interviewing you in my current, I still have that office. They let me keep it all these years. But you know, here was somebody who had been, you had been like working on like Cattleman's magazines or something like that. It's like, well, she can probably do this. I do remember at one point, you thought you might be interested in teaching. So it's like, sure, you know, have an 1122. And then you said, well, that's enough. It was on top of your other job. And I should just, you know, seeing Amy and Lauren sitting next to each other is just a real treat. The DU student, Thomas, he was way far on the Asperger's scale. You'd give him, you'd ask him to write 10 pages, he would write 40. It would be pretty good. But he would just, had no boundaries. He'd talk all the time in class. So I talked to him and I said, okay, here's what's happened. I said, and oh, by the way, you know, you need to bring Kleenex to class because his nose would run and the other, you know, students would get kind of like, they weren't quite making fun of him. So it's fine. So we invented a sign that if I did this, this meant that he should be quiet. And so he would check in with me once a week. And 4 years later, he graduates. Gives me a really nice note. There are bad memories too. Ernest Morel, Kathy Short, and I, in January 2014 or 15 or so, I have to get, are having to decide that we need to have the executive director of NCTE step down because he's in very bad health. He's dead of cancer in a few months. And just remembering sitting in a hotel room in Washington, D.C. and wrestling with what we're going to do, how we're going to bring this off. Happier times, Eliana Schoenberg on a boat at night in a fjord in Norway in search of the Northern Lights, which never made an appearance. If we'd only known she could have come to Wyoming last week. You know, and then just oodles of memories. Just pick one favorite one out. Kathy came and gave a talk one year at Halloween, and so I had everybody come over to our house. And so the house is full of writing program folks, and there are trick-or-treaters coming. Jennifer Novak has like our big bowl of candy, and she's greeting kids. We're sitting on the front porch. I distinctly remember you, David, and others. And Jennifer's going like, take as much as you want. I said, no, you can't. Anyway, but my point is, it's the people rather than the ideas that you need to hold on to. Finally, PACRET. I find my first teaching evaluations, Finley, they're pretty good, you know. There's I thought the class was too elementary, but my favorite one, number 4, Mr. Hesse is a youngster at this, but he did a very good job. And then a letter I got from a student. Unbeknownst to you, this was in March, I began affectionately referring to you as my grandpa. And then she goes on, why, you know, so I'm moved to tears again thinking about this. It's your students, it's your colleagues, it is the ideas of the field, but it's those networks that matter. So, thank you.
I think it's important to note that I didn't know this place existed, except that I knew Doug Hesse had created this program that everyone knew about in some way or another. And then I heard that the position was open here. And many of you know I didn't actually know where this was until I drove here. But I sent Doug a note, and I said, are you okay? That was my first question. I was like, are you okay? And he's like, no, I've just been doing this a while. And then and he's like, are you interested? And I thought, I don't know. You know, I really just didn't know. And so you were instrumental in bringing me here. But to a program that was the only reason I'd actually leave everything I knew and move across the country to a place where I knew 2 people. So you have created quite the program for someone to come to that. Okay, we have little presents. I love presents. Okay, so there was a postcard situation that has been discussed, and so many people have written postcards. So there's postcards in here and some other little fun things. And this is actually from Brad. He's just like, he just brought this up here, and he should be giving it to you, but that's from Brad. So we just wanted to say thank you so much. Man. And there was no way that you could leave campus without us acknowledging the wonderful things that you've done here. So. That I cried everything, so I'm not going to talk about anything else anymore right now. So what we have at 3:30, you want to mingle a bit, y'all can talk, chat. 3:30, if you want to go upstairs to the roof area, we have food,
On the west, in the west side.
the west side of the roof area. We have food, and then at 4, we will have drinks. You just have to say you're from the writing program, and you can have a beer or wine at 4, but the food and all will be there at 3:30. So we don't want the visiting and the festivities to end here. So I forgot to ask if anyone had questions for you, Doug. Yeah, this is the last
Do you always
chance.
get so choked up?
Yes.
Yes.
Doug,
I
thank
got
you.
you. Wait a minute.
Oh, sorry, there's people.
I'll bring it back to you.
I know I speak for all of us. Thank you for everything you've done for us. And I've always admired how prolific you are. And I'm happy to hear about these writing projects. I guess, aside from all the writing, what are you most excited to spend your time doing away from the University of Denver?
You know, I have 3 grandkids, and rumor has it that perhaps, you know, more might be coming. It's hard to make or it's hard for me to carve out the time to go spend there. And even when, you know, things were better, less congested when I'm not directing the program, but even then there's always something, especially because I inveterately would just get myself involved in another organization. I mean, I've been asked, for example, there's a leadership vacuum right now in CWPA, you know, would I be like an interim president? And I'm really wrestling with this. But the point is that there seem to always be just enough tugs that, yes, I can go a long weekend to visit grandkids, but not 2 weeks. And of course I could. But I really needed to make a psychological break with that role. So I think you know, better engagements with family. I will keep hiking and taking photographs. I do have some other projects I'm interested in. There are some. I'll give you one. There's a guy named J. Innes Hetzler. He's 70-something. He lives outside of Colorado Springs. He did some of the early notable climbs of mountains in Colorado 40 years ago. He's also a Juilliard-trained composer who has written a 58-movement symphony. I mean, doesn't this guy sound interesting? He's also one of the, he's a real authority on butterflies in the Colorado mountains. So this is a sort of polymath. Before John dies, I want to go interview him. And there are other stories like that. If people don't write them, you know, he'll be an asterisk. So, but you know, the idea of doing writing that is not in service to a request or a demand is pretty enticing. I'll keep busy.
Other questions or comments?
I have a little request. Could you, sorry, Doug, could you go, this is my request, could you go back to your spaghetti poem and read it out loud?
I didn't, that was a question.
It was, it was.
Wait, I killed the internet.
Doug, I too wrote bad poems to girls in high school.
Look where I got both.
I think there's a show of hands answer, David, because I.
I'm never putting any minor
Before we moved out here, Rebecca was doing some of my.
My high school girlfriend, Diane, who I've kept in touch with all these years. Diane went to Yale Divinity School and ended up out there. She's happily married. She wrote me this morning because she had grown up in Kelmus, Iowa, where my aunt Diane, so they knew, and but she mailed me back about 5 or 6 years ago all of the letters I had written. And boy, if that's ever happened to you, you just got to think really long and hard whether you're going to open that box. I made the mistake of opening the box. It's kind of like Brad Pitt at the end of Seven. You know? Sorry, that was pretty good. Anyway. Love is spaghetti sauce coating our lives until we see only the opaque mushrooms looming in the future. Pass the salt, please. Oh, source of warmth, source of calories, source of rancid memories. Leave me here, a ragu man, smitten with this Italian cuisine.
Don't try to throw that away.
My office is like Norse House of Lore. Nothing ever gets described. Are we?
No, you go. We have plenty of time. Any questions or any other questions or comments?
Any rebuttals? Yes, Poupée.
I got you.
I can. Doug, what's your secret to your archive? Like, how do you keep this archive? And how do you access it?
Oh, no. You've asked two questions. The second is unanswerable. I mean, I should have taken a picture. It would have been revelatory. So I got home last night from rehearsal at 10 o'clock. You should all see Ray Vaughan Williams' The Sea Symphony, Colorado Symphony Chorus, $10. But I was bound and determined I was going to find those sophomore year writing assignments. So I'm in this storage room in the basement, and there are open boxes everywhere. And I'm getting close. I find a bunch of other college papers. So I just keep everything. And every now and then it gets resorted. But it never gets cataloged. And I realize, and this is a sobering moment, there's no way in hell that even 30% of the stuff that's in my office now will make it home. Or Becky, like Dawn, will say, well, I'm leaving Denver. So, you know, one of the, just sort of sorting this out, some of which, I mean, I will be professionally responsible. I won't throw away the blueprints, but, you know, some of it matters. But here's the thing, archives don't matter to a lot of people anymore. They matter 20 years after. It's like, damn, I wish we had that. But as Rob knows, I inherited some 12 or 14 boxes of records from the Margaret Witt and earlier era. So I have, for example, what the exit exams were, writing classes in the, were you still doing exit exams in the, yeah.
Yes.
So I still have those along with the answer sheets and so on, scads of student writing and so on. I have very little faith that if I walked that over to the library, they would care. They might say, well, could you digitize it and give us them? So some of it, I just keep things, and as long as I have the luxury of yet another box, that works fine. Some of it is historical stuff that I believe enough in the power of history that if it doesn't get kept, something is lost. So that's why I have emails. I have my Eudora files from starting in 1997. I don't have the things before then. But I can give you emails from the profession, except for 2 periods where computer virus just wiped out the online storage. So, here is Bob Connors weighing in on a particular issue. Here's my writing to Wendy Bishop, like, we need in 4Cs a public policy committee, because as long as the world outside the discipline keeps misunderstanding writing, we are in bad shape. And so, and then the reply from Wendy, that's a great idea, you chair it. Who do you want on it? So, negotiate. And then, of course, you get busy with other things. But it's important. I had this conversation with Liz Wardall 3 or 4 months ago, where she was talking about, I said, Liz, we tried a version of this before. I mean, it was one of those, why hasn't 4Cs ever tried to shape public policy? It's like, well, here's what happened. Here's why it foundered. But I'm guessing others can do it better. So, but I think it's, and I don't know, some of it is probably ego. It's like, I want to inscribe myself in history with this bit of, pen dipped in water like John Keats. But I'd like to think there's something, a little bit beyond this.
Any others?
Many of you know that Doug and I go way back. He was my professor at Illinois State University, so.
In English.
That's right. Yes, that's right. And I'm going to admit something very embarrassing right now. A year ago, I was cleaning out our basement, and I found floppy disks from our class together, and it was the very first website I had ever built, because Doug was cutting edge at the time. And
it was a long time ago.
It was a long time ago, yes. But I still have floppy disks from your class.
Wow.
And I asked myself, why did I keep these? It was like one of those moments of like, because it was so powerful, it was the first time I'd ever thought about, what is a website? I get to build what, right? Because this was during the era of email coming out for the very first time. So it was a big deal. But I remember you, I remember the class, and of course history, right? But yeah, I just wanted to comment.
No. And I, of course, remember that very well. Thanks. I do remember, God, what was the name of the Macintosh program? Anyway, I got the idea that you could do some interesting training of TAs. First, I hate the word training. But some interesting work with TAs if you created hypertext. So, it was in the days you made a hypercard stack. Hypercard, I think was the. And I remember Scott DeWitt, was like one of my grad students, and Scott was really very, I might have been like blunt edge, but Scott was really. And so I remember him going through, and somewhere back there is a 4Cs presentation on using creating hypertextual archives and materials that seemed cool. And then that was before websites. And so what you had was, you could give to all of the TAs. By that time we had graduated to the 3.5 inch. You don't have the 5.25, do you?
No.
Okay. But you know, the idea that you could give a repository of things on it, and that you could have some architecture where they could find, like, here's an assignment, here's a, yeah, it was heady days.
Okay, so thank you again for coming. Please, let's not have any attrition on the way upstairs. So everybody go upstairs and visit some more.